welcome to the Forbes Center for the Performing Arts. Please take a moment to locate your nearest emergency exit, and out of respect for the artists on stage, as well as the other audience members, we ask that you turn off your cell phones now and refrain from texting during the show. As mandated by federal copyright law, any form of unauthorized recording or photography is strictly prohibited. Also, per JMU Health Ed safety guidelines, all patrons must wear a mask when in the Forbes Center. There will be no intermission. Thank you, and enjoy the performance.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, and welcome to my presentation entitled Moments in Sonder, a guided narrative analysis of the poetry of Dr. Maya Angelou as set by composer Dr. B.E. Boykin. To begin, I'd like to briefly thank my document committee, co-chairs Dr. Sonia Baker and Dr. Vander Vat Cromie, as well as Dr. Jameson Walker, Dr. William Kale, and Dr. Natoya Haskins, who have been incredibly supportive of me and my DMA document entitled A Survey of Collegiate Voice Students with Asthma and Allergies and Their Perceived Impact on Singer Health and Performance Experiences. I'd also like to thank Anna Showalter for collaborating with me on this wonderful song cycle. It has been a joy and a blessing to work with you. Lastly, I'd like to thank my mother, Eunice Jenkins, who has been praying and supporting me through every endeavor since I was a small child, and who also turns 77 years old today. Happy birthday, Mom. I was first introduced to Dr. B.E. Boykin in the spring of 2020 while I was searching for a composer to study in Dr. John Peterson's Theory Seminar of Underrepresented Composers. I was perusing through a YouTube playlist of African American women composers and came across a video of Dr. Boykin and soprano Lenora Green Turner performing 3 Maya Angelou songs as part of the concert Generation Next, Passing the Torch at the African American Art Song Alliance's 20th anniversary conference. Deeply moved by their performance, I began to search for more repertoire by Dr. Boykin and discovered that the song cycle containing those 3 songs was completed and scheduled for distribution in December of 2020. Since her performance at the African American Art Song Alliance's concert, Dr. Boykin's song cycle has created a lot of buzz in the art song arena. On September 15, 2020, Dr. Boykin was featured along with composer Lori Laitman on Idagio, the world's leading streaming service for classical music through the Hamsong Foundation, as part of the acclaimed baritone Thomas Hampson's World of Song series entitled Song and Beyond, Episode 3, which focused on women's creativity using the Song of America program, There Is No Gender in Music. Dr. Boykin is not only a prolific composer of art songs and choral music, she is also an amazing pianist and conductor. Dr. Maya Angelou was extremely gifted in knowing how to replicate who she was on paper and empower others through her life experience. She began writing poetry at the age of 15 and continued to write poetry until a year before her death. She used her poetry to share her own scars of racism and classism that had inflicted her life. At the same time, her poetry depicted her resilience. Her writings empowered her to transform her life experiences into a source of strength and human dignity. Although she wrote about the Black experience, Dr. Angelou always referred to the human condition of all mankind. The most consistent topic in her poetry is about love, either requited or unrequited. Other topics include racial injustice, the sale and use of drugs, imprisonment, and spirituality. After listening to Dr. Boykin's interpretation of 3 of Dr. Angelo's poems, I wanted to see if the setting of the text was in the way Dr. Angelo would have spoken it. Dr. Angelo's poetry is already grounded in orality, as she was also an entertainer who toured as a poet all over the world. Angelo once said that she writes for the voice, not the eye. So I found an album of her performing her own poems, 7 of which Dr. Boykin set in her song cycle, Moments in Sonder. But before I analyze Dr. Boykin's song cycle, let's briefly discuss the word Sonder and its relevance. The definition of Sonder was taken from the Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows, which began as a website and a YouTube series in 2009 by a video maker, graphic designer, and voice-over artist named John Koenig. 12 years later, Koenig released the book of the same title. The word Sonder and its definition are included in the 4th chapter entitled Faces in a Crowd, Catching Glimpses of Humanity from a Distance. The book is filled with new words that express deep emotions, and I quote, "To shine a light on the fundamental strangeness of being a human being, all the aches, demons, vibes, joys, and urges that are humming in the background of everyday life." Koenig writes that Sonder is the awareness that everyone has a story. Let's listen to a clip from a TED Talk where Koenig spoke more about the word Sonder.
And so I decided to try to define that emotion. And about halfway through this project, I defined Sonder, the idea that we all think of ourselves as the main character and everyone else is just extras. But in reality, we're all the main character. And you yourself are an extra in someone else's story. And so as soon as I published that, I got a lot of response from people saying, thank you for giving voice to something that I felt all my life, but there was no word for that. So it made them feel less alone. I think that's the power of words, to make us feel less alone.
When Dr. Boykin was nearly finished with her song cycle, she wanted a title that spoke to the human experience. In her view, although we each are the main character in our own story, we should consider how our story fits in other people's lives as well. We may have different perspectives, but we should still search for that unifying view, figuring out the human condition in community with each other. Dr. Boykin was intentional about portraying this theme through Dr. Angelo's poems. Boykin set 14 poems from the complete collected poems of Maya Angelou, which was given to her as a Christmas gift. 7 poems were taken from Angelou's Pulitzer-nominated book of poetry entitled Just Give Me a Cool Drink of Water, 'Fore I Die, her first published volume of poetry written in 1971. These 7 poems express autobiographical moments of denial, regret, and painful memories Angelou depicts of her past personal relationships. Boykin set 5 other poems from Angelou's Oh Pray My Wings Are Gonna Fit Me Well, published in 1975. 4 poems taken from Part 2 depict images of loneliness, lost love, and isolation. Reverses, the 5th poem taken from Part 5, depicts the image of a couple in an awkward sexual position, meant to shock the audience into acknowledging the futility of living in the past and the imperative to look to the future. The final 2 poems for Moment and Sonder were taken from Angelou's And Still I Rise, written in 1978. The poem entitled Refusal depicts moments in the lives of men and women who take life for all it has to offer: love, loss, and the hope of better days to come. The poem entitled The Lesson depicts the emotional turmoil of being a drug addict. although there are a total of 14 poems set in Boykin's song cycle, each moment is short, yet powerful. Now I'd like to discuss Boykin's setting of a few of these poems that reflect her compositional writing style and how her settings enhance Angelo's original intentions. In Boykin's writing, we will see 2 measured harmonic groupings to help move the narrative, A-B-A and A-A-B structures, with the B section being less stable and more dissonant, A-A structure, which gives the melody a steady and constant forward motion in the accompaniment, which she prefers more than through composed. Use of rests to draw attention to the text. Text repetition to create a mood shift. Key signature changes and rhythmic diversity, particularly in the song Refusal. And inspired by the Holy Spirit and by the poetry. I added this last point after asking her who inspires her writing style. She does not think theoretically when she composes, but is moved emotionally by the poetry and then led by the Holy Spirit to create beautiful melodies and accompaniment. It truly is a gift from God. Now I'd like to offer Angelo's interpretation of her poem, Sounds Like Pearls, a stanzaic poem by Angelo. Sounds Like Pearls depicts a cunning fellow who, through his charming yet deceptive flirtation, results in a woman dropping down all of her defenses and even losing her senses. Let's listen to Dr. Angelo's performance of the poem.
Sounds like pearls roll off your tongue to grace this eager ever ear. Doubt and fear, ungainly thing, with blushings disappear.
In Sounds Like Pearls, Boykin writes in A-B-A form. And as you can see here, the A section is written in with a sparkling rhythmic accompaniment in the treble clef. Also in 2-measure harmonic groupings. The B section begins in measure 12 with a slow tempo marking on the 5 chord of G minor to serve the mood of the text, doubt and fear. Then in measure 14, she indicates that the singer can sing the text with blushings and disappear as a 2-measure grouping under, with a 2-measure grouping under it, a 4/4 rests in the accompaniment. I call this a Selah moment, as it was originally meant as a musical direction of the Book of Psalms to allow the reader to stop and think about what they've just heard. Then the A section returns with zeal to emphasize the repeated text, disappear. Now let's listen to the excerpt. Although it begins in G minor, it ends in G major, not shown here, but worth mentioning, as a happy moment to serve the text. Surprise endings are also an exciting feature of Boykin's writing style. In When You Come to Me, Angelo writes another stanzaic poem with the words lie and cry to connect the 2 stanzas. Again, Angelo was more concerned about the voice than the eye. So some of her poetry readings may be different than what's written. Let's listen.
When you come to me unbidden, beckoning me to long ago rooms where memories lie, offering me as to a child an antic, gatherings of days too few, baubles of stolen kisses, trunks of borrowed loves, trinkets of secret words, I cry.
In this excerpt of When You Come to Me, Boykin's interpretation of the poem was to use two-measure harmonic groupings to move the narrative. Now let's listen to the excerpt. Boykin uses two-measure groupings on the one chord in E minor to connect the first stanza to the second, which continues the narrative and keeps the forward motion. This song is in AAB form, with 8-measure phrasing of the first and second stanzas and two-measure harmonic groupings in between to move the narrative. Worth mentioning but not shown in this excerpt, Boykin then halts the forward motion with block chords in the accompaniment, which begins the B section. The piece ends with two fermatas over the text, words, and I, with a comma in between to emphasize the last line of the poem, I cry. Tears is also a two-stanza poem that depicts a metaphor of disconnectedness, and then as a dying song and a dream deferred. Let's listen to the poem.
Tears, the crystal rags, viscous tatters of a worn-through soul. Moans, deep swan song, blue farewell of a dying dream.
In this song, written in D minor, Boykin uses a popular minor progression 1, 6, 5, 7, 1, and two-measure harmonic groupings to complete the 8-measure phrases. The vocal line nearly mirrors Angelo's interpretation. The 6/8 meter and AA form keep the harmonic language constant throughout and gives the narrative a perpetual motion. It is a depiction of falling tears. Now let's listen to the excerpt. Boykin's constant 8th note motion and harmonic changes every 2 measures create a feeling of comfort and ease despite the deep sadness expressed in the poem. That is what makes Dr. Boykin such an amazing composer. In Tears, Boykin invites you into a moment that has a strong sense of stability, yet, at the same time, serves the serious emotion of the text. With regards to reverses, Boykin expresses the concern singers had about the subject matter of this poem. That although the poem comes off very raw and in our face, that's the point. We should confront these interpersonal experiences in our lives and not shy away from doing so. We must not be afraid to tell the truth about who we are, what we've done, nor about what has been done to us. This poem expresses that we can never be free from what keeps us hidden, from what we keep hidden in the dark. This poem is not included on Angelo's album, as it was written after the recording was created, but feel free to read along while I recite it. How often must we, butt to head, mind to ass, flank to nuts, cock to elbow, hip to toe, soul to shoulder, confront ourselves in our past. Now let's listen to the excerpt. verses, Boykin uses an ABA structure, which begins with a 12-measure introduction. The harmony changes every 4 measures, with awkward leaps in the bass line used to set the stage. In measure 37, Boykin breaks the forward motion to call attention to the text, "Confront ourselves in our past." Then repeats the text, "in our past," by changing the meter from cut time to 6/8, and by creating more dissonant block chords in the accompaniment. Boykin then brings back the A section in measure 40 on the word past to emphasize the importance of confronting our past. By giving us the reprise, Boykin brings us back full circle, as if to say, we keep going around that mountain instead of having the courage to speak to the mountain and to cast it into the sea. Refusal is a story of loneliness from the loss of a loved one. It is a depiction of a bond so strong between 2 lovers that it never dies. Feel free to read along as I recite the poem. Beloved, in what other lives or lands have I known your lips, your hands, your laughter brave, irreverent? Those sweet excesses that I do adore, what surety is there that we will meet again on other worlds, some future time undated? I defy my body's haste. Without the promise of one more sweet encounter, I will not deign to die. The promise is that one will meet their lover again in death, and the refusal to die unless that promise is fulfilled. This song has the most diverse setting of Dr. Angelo's poetry. There is a key signature change in measure 21 from D major to G minor. Then in measure 27, notice the tritone interval in the bass line as the harmony moves back to D major in measure 29. She repeats the progression 1, 5, 6, 4, 6, 1, 4, 1 for each phrase. Then at measure 19, writes a D minor 7th chord to move the narrative into the G minor key. Let's listen to the excerpt. In this excerpt, you can hear that the form is also very different. A prime, B, C, with a more majestic transition and rhythmic diversity expressing hope and trust in the promise. In conclusion, there are many other interesting examples of Boykin's writing style that were not shown in the presentation, the first being long piano introductions to set the stage. Boykin also creates mood changes at the ends of songs using the 4 chord or major chord with a flat 5 to lead the hearer to a different place. This you will hear particularly in a Time, Senses of Insecurity, and Passing Time. The examples of Boykin's writing style are endless and exciting to the hearer. What I've learned about Boykin's writing style is her sensitivity to the text in many of the songs to make you feel comfortable, yet with a strong sense of stability. She uses tritones, arpeggiated minor 7th chords, and octave leaps in the vocal line for deeper emotional expressions of difficult subjects in Angelo's poetry. That concludes the lecture portion of my presentation. Before I sing, I want to mention that there are a few slight discrepancies between Angelo's poetry and Boykin's settings. What you will see on the screen is Angelo's poetry, but I will be singing the text as written in Boykin's song cycle. Now it is my pleasure to transition to the musical portion of my presentation by performing the song cycle Moments in Sonder by Drs. B.E. Boykin and Maya Angelou. Thank you.
Lord.